Okay.
Recording in progress.
Morning, everyone. My name is Councillor Cheryl Carlisle and I'm the Chair of Finance and Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can I welcome everyone to the meeting, which is a multi-location meeting. The meeting will be live streamed and recorded and will be available for viewing after the meeting. Should the live streaming fail, the meeting will continue and a recording will be available through the Council's website following the conclusion of the meeting. Can I remind members that translation facilities are available and for those attending remotely to choose your language of choice, please. For those wishing to speak in the chamber, please raise your hand. For those attending remotely, please use the raised hand function. We will alternate between speakers in the chamber and remote attendees. For those attending remotely, please note that those in the chamber will be unable to use the chat facility. Committee members who are attending remotely are required to leave their camera on throughout the debate and when voting in order to maintain the integrity of the decision-making process. If you do need to leave the meeting temporarily, pop a message in the chat function so the Democratic Services Officer is aware and then let us know when you return. Can I stress that I expect everyone present and participating in this meeting to conduct themselves appropriately and be respectful to each other. That applies to members, officers, and anyone in the public gallery. When I open up the debate to members, I will ask committee members to speak and put their questions first, followed by non-committee members. It would be helpful if members could ask all their questions in one go. Whilst I do not wish to stifle debate, can I remind members any questions should be focused on the subject matter and to avoid repetition. If I feel the length of individual speeches are negatively impacting on the overall time for discussion and becoming unmanageable, I will defer to the committee's rules of procedure, which limits the length of speeches to 5 minutes. So we'll move on to the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence, please, Sally.
Yeah, we've had an apology from Councillor Stephen Price and also Katie Clubb, Head of Strategic Housing.
Thank you. And Councillor Emily has said she will be a bit late, as will Councillor Louise. Have we got any apologies online? Anybody? No. Okay, thank you very much. We now move on to item 2, declarations of interest. Nothing you need to flag up this morning? No. Okay, no declarations. Wonderful. Item 3, urgent matters. There aren't any urgent matters this morning. Item 4, minutes, pages 3 to 8. Please could I have a proposer and a seconder for the minutes held on the 20th of January? Councillor Aaron and Sharon. Thank you.
Just rhywbeth bach,
I did send apologies for the meeting, but it's not down, just something small to note.
Sorry, could you say that again, Councillor Aaron?
I had sent apologies for the meeting, so that will need to be changed. Thank you.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much, Deal. So we've had a proposer and a seconder if everyone would like to show. Thank you. Anyone against? No, those are carried. Thank you very much, members. Item 5, questions to cabinet members. There are none. And we move on to item 6, appointment of member of the Finance and Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee to the School Loan Application Panel. Could we have a volunteer, a willing volunteer? You can indeed.
Can I? Sorry, can you ask him to speak into the microphone?
Could you speak into the microphone, translator?
Sorry. Can I nominate Councillor Hannah Fleet, please?
Thank you, Councillor Aaron.
Thank you.
Nomination for Councillor Hannah. Have we got a seconder? Councillor Chris, if everyone would like to show. Any other nominations? Anybody else online? No. Okay, if members would like to show in favour of Councillor Hannah. A microphone, Dawn, sorry.
Councillor Hannah, you're already on that committee as part of the education. So,
Oh,
so I was busily trying to find my email. So
right.
The members that are on there already are Councillors Gwenol, Councillors Hannah, Councillor Chris Brockley, Councillor Gareth, Councillor Stephen Price. Three members have been on the committee.
Councillor Anne, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, I was just about to vote. Sorry, I hadn't realised I'd taken it down. Sorry, Cheryl.
Oh, thank you. So, could we have another nomination, please? Don't all rush.
Nain with the Concordia Sean Grady.
I'll nominate Councillor Sean Grady.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Aaron. So we've had a nomination for Councillor Sean Grady. Could we have a second, please? Councillor Gareth, would everyone like to show in favour of Councillor Sean? Lovely, that's carried. That's carried unanimously. Congratulations, Councillor Sean, she says. Okay, now we move on to item 7A, the revised capital programme 24-25 Q3 monitoring report. This is on pages 9 to 26. Councillor Charlie, the leader, is going to introduce, and Amanda Hughes, our strategic director, finance and resources, going to present the report. So, good morning.
Yeah, before I introduce this report, Chair, I'd just like to record my thanks to this committee for the really important role that they play in scrutinising all our finance and resource decisions. Members will be fully aware of the really valuable work that our other three scrutiny committees do. We have economy and place, social care, and health and education. And we also have a governance and audit committee that's chaired by an independent layperson. And as a council, we are of course subject to external regulatory inspections on a regular basis from the likes of Audit Wales, Care Inspectorate Wales and Eston. We all know these are really difficult times for local authorities, so it's absolutely right that every spending decision that we made is subject to really rigorous scrutiny. You'll be aware that our recently revised corporate plan has put financial resilience at the forefront, with an emphasis on working to protect the most vulnerable in our society. So again, the work of this committee will be of even more importance. I'd also like to thank our Strategic Director for Finance and Resources, Amanda Hughes, for the quality of the reports and the information that we receive. I spend quite a lot of time looking at other councils' reports, and in my personal opinion is that the information we're provided by members is absolutely exemplary, and that's vitally important when we're being asked to make such difficult decisions. So I'll just move on to introducing the first report, Chair. So this report basically is the revised capital programme for 24-25 and the Q3 to monitor where we're up to so far. So you'll note 1.2, the total capital programme now stands at 106.458 million. It was previously in the 26th of November, 102.194 million. So there's going to be a net increase of 2.683 million. That's for approval today. Pleased to say of that money, of the 2.683 million, 2.585 will be funded with external grants. So only 98,000 of that will fall upon the council's resources. Appendix 1 details where there have been changes in projects, and then Appendix 2 gives details of every single project that we're active on across the county. I had the pleasure of visiting the Kimnell Bay Sea Defences last week on a site visit, and it's hugely impressive to see that the massive amount of work that's gone on this really major engineering project, which will provide protection to many, many thousands of households. You know, we should be really proud of the work we've done across our coast. It's the longest stretch of defended coast in Wales, and that cost comes at a considerable cost. So this is a really good example of where we have necessary spend that makes a real beneficial difference to our residents. Chair. So I shall hand over to Amanda at this stage. So, Jock.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Charlie. I must confess, I'm not sure there's that much extra to add, if truth be told. But just for a point of clarity, that this report also, or this, this quarter sweeps up as well as the 2.683, which is seeking approval today, which is predominantly grant. It also sweeps up the 1.581 million, which is actually capital capital which has already been approved by council, and that was two particular schemes. You'll recall the office accommodation strategy decisions around approving £1 million of capital for that, and also £500,000 for the Timar development. So they were decisions that have already been taken either by Cabinet or Council in accordance with the delegated arrangements, but the report also then contains those but isn't seeking approval because that's already been had. So I think the only little bit of information Charlie didn't mention was that the report also just confirms as at 31st of December 90 million had been spent against the capital programme. So happy to take any questions, but yeah, I don't think I've got much else to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. You're saving yourself the main event. Have we got any questions or comments from members? Anyone? Oh, Councillor David online.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask about the TMR development and the £500,000 that's been allocated. Now, if that for any reason that development doesn't go ahead, that money will be lost. In a way, it's a gamble, isn't it? So, you know, we're gambling at this point in time with public money. You know, really, we need to be very careful. So I'd just like to a bit more detail on that, because if that development doesn't go ahead, and there's no guarantee it will, that money will be lost, and it's an awful lot of money for the council to lose. Thank you.
Councillor Charlie or Amanda?
Yeah, there is a degree of risk with that pursuance of that scheme, but that was considered in the report that Cabinet considered when they made their decision. Obviously, if the development does go ahead, then it has the potential of yielding a significant capital receipt for the council, which it wouldn't if it doesn't go ahead, you know, if it was left to be agricultural land. So it was a balance to be weighed up, and as I say, those decisions, that was considered by Cabinet when it made its decision. Thank you.
Content with that answer, Councillor David?
Well, I seem to remember it didn't come before us in Finance and Resources, and it was actually the public and the press were excluded when that decision was made. I think a little bit more openness, especially when it's such a large amount of money. I know there's contractors and other things that we need to be mindful of, but we could actually have votes in principle on these things without it going behind closed doors. So really, you know, the decision was taken behind closed doors. So I'm a bit unsettled by that. Thank you.
I think the decision was the report was exempt because it had confidential information in it, and that was why there was no attempt to make a decision behind closed doors for any other purpose than it had exempt information in the report.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor David and Amanda, for that. Councillor Aaron.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question on Appendix 3, I think I'm on, under highways. So resurfacing Watling Street and Llanrwst, there's been a change of 259,000 to 200,000. Why has there been a change? Is it perhaps the project is going to cost less? Can someone from ERF maybe answer?
Yeah, Councillor Aaron. Andy, are you? Councillor Cromwell online, maybe?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question. The voice is very loud. People speak to the mic. I could hear that.
Oh, it was translation, but you'd like to say it again, please, Councillor Aaron.
Yeah, no, of course. Now siarad I fewn i'r mic.
I'll speak into the microphone. There's been a change in the capital for Watling Street in Llanrwst. There's quite a sum less. Does that mean that the project is going to cost less? I just wanted to know why there's a difference.
Thank you, Councillor Aaron. Yes, these microphones, as we know, are on their way out, so you have to yell into them. Okay, Councillor Gronwy.
Apologies, I still couldn't hear the question. Perhaps one of the officers could answer. I can't hear the question.
Okay, Amanda, if you would like to.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll come in and answer. In fairness, I suspect Councillor Gunn, we wouldn't be able to answer because it's a technical answer. The reason the scheme is going ahead and the scheme is identical to how it has always been planned. I think at an early point in time we anticipated a higher level of grant, and we've now had notification of the grant. So effectively, it's just an accounting adjustment to reduce the grant down. The actual scheme value remains the same.
You're content, Councillor Aaron? Lovely. Okay, any more questions? Oh, Councillor Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarification, I was a bit surprised that Councillor David was saying that decisions are being made behind closed doors when actually all elected members who represent their constituents are allowed to come to Cabinet, have debate at that time and ask any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nigel. Not quite on topic, but I think as a chair, I can decide who speaks and what they say. So I don't really think that's an appropriate intervention, but never mind. Okay, anybody else? No. Okay. Well, this is looking good for an early finish, isn't it? Right, could I have so we've got no recommendations other than those within on page 9, 2.1. Have we got a proposer and a seconder for this report, please? Councillor Aaron propose and Councillor Hannah second. Okay. If members would like to show. Anyone against? Any abstentions? No, that's carried then. Thank you very much, members. Excellent. We now move on to item 7B, the revenue budget 24-25, Q3 monitoring report. You can find this on pages 27 to 38. Councillor Charlie's again going to introduce this, and Amanda Hughes, Strategic Director, is going to present the report. Councillor Charlie.
Again, Gareth. I think it'd be useful before we go into this paper to look at our Q3 monitoring, just to remind ourselves of how difficult the budgetary situation was last year. Members will be aware we received the lowest settlement in Wales, which is 2.29%. That equated to 4.6 million. We did some independent work with our care homes to analyse the real care of their costs for our residents, and that actually came in at 4.8 million. So before we started to balance our budget, we were 200k in arrears. Pay and wages, which are set nationally, was an additional 14 million. So we were in a situation where even with a really high level of council tax, just below 10%, we still had to find 12 million pounds of savings. We know over a number of years, that's now north of 90 million pounds. So that gets increasingly hard year after year to make those levels of savings. It is a source of frustration that if the NHS was having those level of cuts, there would be hell to pay. But unfortunately, for councils, that just seems to be a par for the course. So this is monitoring where we're up to in the third quarter. I will let Amanda go through the report. It is broadly positive news, but obviously there are real concerns about the increasing demand for social care. To give that some context, you'll be aware of the Welsh Government's 50-day campaign, which was about freeing up hospital beds. We know that's vitally important. We know the NHS is struggling. It's absolutely right that we should do everything we can to assist getting people out of hospitals into a more appropriate level of care. But the reality for that for Conwy was there was a 10% spike in the third quarter of around 60 residents that we had to care for, which basically cost 1.9 million pounds. Again, it's morally right that we do that. It's a legal requirement that we do that. We know NHS beds per day can be anywhere from £350 a day up to 2,000, depending on the level of complexity of need. But that has caused us serious ongoing concerns. And I guess more importantly, that feeds into next year's budget because that demand is there. So I'll let Amanda go through the details of the report. As I say, there are some good bits, but there are also some very concerning things about the level of demand that we need to meet moving forward, Chair. So thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Charlie. Amanda?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, so this report then, sets out the latest forecast third quarter position, and you'll be pleased, as I was certainly, that the outlook is now improved from the second quarter. So at the second quarter, we were anticipating at that point that we would be about £5.5 million with our spend in excess of our income. That now has reduced to 1.225 million, and that's effectively for a number of reasons. So which I'll go through. So there are pluses and minuses within that. So effectively across the service position, it's either consistent with the previous quarter or in some instances has improved. Some services of through I guess their sort of compliance with the spend control regime and really focusing on only spending absolutely essentially. Some services are now in a position to declare that they think they'll be underspent to a small extent, etc. As I say, the others have stayed consistent. The one area that's not the case is with social care, and as Councillor Charlie's just outlined, we have seen through the year a growth in particular in residents in care homes, which has obviously got an impact in terms of the in-year position. So whilst that's of concern, and obviously that's a worsening of the position from quarter two. Equally, though, we have then had a number of positives which have helped bring it down to that net 1.2 position. So one of the fundamental changes is that Welsh Government have unusually provided additional in-year funding. They made assumptions around the pay awards when they did the original draft final settlement back in March or February, I can't remember which, and obviously the pay awards resulted in being higher than that, both in terms of teachers and in terms of NJC. So Welsh Government have been able in year to allocate some additional funding towards those additional pay costs, and you'll see in table 1 effectively that we've had 2.9 million additional money. The other positive thing, which you'll recall that the budget had a risk within it because we still didn't have in the previous 2 quarters, we didn't have confirmation from Welsh Government yet about the funding for the teachers' employer pension contribution increase that happened at the start of this financial year, and that also then has come through and been confirmed. So that again is positive news. So as I say, we've had an additional 2.908 million in funding, which is good. Also, you'll recall in the last report that I referenced that we'd had some one-off money for Park ADFA to do with some refinancing that had happened and was a benefit to all of the partners in that arrangement, and that was 1.351. In the last quarter, I hadn't effectively taken account of that, so I've now taken account of that. I've now treated that as income, and that obviously therefore is of benefit. And then also a number of corporate budgets have also now got some sort of positives to them. In particular, we've been able now to allocate the pay award, the money that we'd set aside for the pay award. Unfortunately, we often can't do this until people have actually been paid. The pay awards have been settled and in people's pay slips because of the nature of the way the pay awards are now, i.e. they're a monetary amount per spinal point rather than a percentage uplift. We need them actually to be in the pay slips to be able to work that out, and we were able to do that then after them going into pay slips in November. So actually we had 466,000 spare, for want of a better word. We'd allocated more than we'd needed, so that's obviously a positive. And I've listed in 3.9 there a handful of other things which are corporate budgets which have been of benefit. So as I say, that brings it down to that net position of 1.225 million. In terms of the actual final position at the end of the year, though, I will have to flag that there are still two amounts of money which I haven't yet taken account of in that net position. One of them is the fact that you will be aware through discussions on the budget and in discussions with schools that a number of schools will have to make redundancies. And that's predominantly because of either falling pupil numbers or a previous over-reliance on the use of balances and other changing positions in terms of grants and so on and so forth. But a number of schools, in order to balance their budgets for next year, will have to make redundancies, and that will have to come in. Then you have to obviously account for them once the obligation exists in the current year. I obviously don't know what the exact cost of those redundancies are at the moment because those processes are currently happening, and unfortunately the level of fund, or the cost, should I say, very much is dependent upon the individual person's level of service and their age, particularly in the context of whether there's pension strain and so on and so forth. So there's an obligation that's going to come through, which I can't quantify. Equally, and of benefit. We also have put in a number of applications for shared prosperity multiply funding, and they're currently going through the approval process, both in terms of our internal process and also externally by Gwynedd Council. And subject to the success of those applications, we may well be in receipt of around another £500,000 in funding. So I'm hoping that those two things will sort of, to an extent, net themselves off, and that the net position will remain the same. I've also set out that I think at this point in time, it is also looking like we might collect slightly more council tax than is in the budget, but I'm again slightly reticent to account for it at this point because we are seeing a slowing in collection, and therefore I'd rather wait and it actually be in the outturn than guess, I guess, in the context of what I think that would be. So as I say, the position is much improved. Obviously, the downside is that this, if we are in the end have a situation where the expenditure remains higher than the income, then obviously that will have to fall on our balances, and you're aware, and I've set out in table 2 what our opening position was on balances. We also know separately that the schools will also have used a number of their balances. So we are going to be in a position by the end of the year that they will have been eroded. And therefore, in the final quarter, we will obviously be continuing with the robust spend control arrangements that we have in place, and focusing on trying to bring that down as best we can. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Members' questions. First one, Councillor Louise.
Diolch, Chair, and mae drwy gen I Ronnie Nhw bore 'ma. I'm sorry I was late this morning. I'd like to use a phrase that Councillor Paul uses, drill down, in some of the reasons why social services can't meet their budget reductions. And I'd like to talk about the 3 areas, and obviously, and also the increased demand. It is a bit of a double whammy. So in terms of the health contributions from Betsy Cadwallader, it's obviously in their interest to make these negotiations long and protracted. I'm sure there'll be no backdating of payments. I'd like a bit more information about what we are doing and whether it becomes a bit political to try and get in there and ensure that if people do need that NHS care, that it's going to be paid for in a care home setting. So that's the first question about social care. The second one is, Thessalian, we says we don't currently have the capacity to attract fee earning clients. So again, perhaps that wasn't me, I didn't understand. If you end up at Thessalian, then it's due to your medical condition rather than how much you can pay. So I'd like some information on that. Is that simply just for people that have severe dementia but who can't pay for it? So I'd like some information about that, understanding that phrase. And then finally about the re-enablement. I get it that if that package works, then there's a potential for people there's a saving there because they don't need the care at home. But clearly we've not been able to save even 100k. So is that just unrealistic? There's no point putting things into the budget if it's unrealistic, or did you honestly think you would be able to make that saving? So 3 questions on social care, please.
Thank you, Councillor Louise. Councillor Penny, do you want to address the Betsy Cadwallader one? What we're doing to get the money from Betsy, and then go to Kat for Thessalian.
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Louise, thank you for your questions. Betsy Cadwallader, as we all know, it's a historical issue that's always existed. I do believe that in the last 3 years, County Council have been a lot more active in meeting with the executive, with our officers going out trying even harder to get money. We work very closely with Betsy Cadwallader. It's a huge ship that an inflatable boat like CBC are hiring hard to get somewhere with monies that are paid. We did have a success with monies that were owed, and we do keep on pursuing it in an open, frank and honest way. So that's Betsy Cadwallader. If you have other hints of how we could succeed, then I will gladly have a conversation with you or the chair or anyone else. Thank you. The next question about people ending up at Thessalian. My mother was in a care home for 8 years with dementia and a brain tumour. She certainly didn't end up anywhere. She was placed there correctly by the family. I'm going to move that to the officer to question that. The Re-enable team is working very closely. We are working with people to enable them to go into their home. And then, of course, we have a domiciliary care package that has to be provided on top of that. So I'm going to go over to either Kat or Jenny to answer that second question of yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Penny. Yes, the Betsy Cadwallader issue has been going on for many years. I remember we had great success about 4 years ago. We upped the level of officers that we sent into negotiations, and we had great successes, particularly in children's services with that. But then Betsy caught up, and they raised their level of officers to combat and the expertise within Conway. So it was a vicious circle. So Pat, if you'd like to.
Can I just clarify, Councillor Louise, you were talking about the savings put forward and our achievements of the savings, weren't you?
Yeah. The re-enablement savings.
Yeah.
Are they realistic?
Yes. So with those re-enablement savings, yes, we have achieved them, but they were cost avoidance, so they were reducing ongoing care packages. So we've got evidence that the re-enablement that's been.
Chair, I can't hear online.
No. Yeah, is that okay now? Yeah. Yeah, so we've got evidence of the impact of that re-enablement. So we provide the first 6 weeks of re-enablement, and then we've got evidence of the cost avoidance going forward. So how many care packages then have either been reduced or no ongoing care required? However, what's happened is we've had, as we've talked about earlier, increased demand throughout the year. So that's then what wiped out the savings that we've got from good management of ongoing care. So we've got more people coming through the door. So the net effect is that it's not that we haven't achieved the saving, is that that saving is being wiped out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So it was a realistic saving.
Yeah, which has been achieved, but we've just got more people. Yeah, yeah.
And then the other one was just, Thessalian, what's the criteria in terms of you saying you haven't got capacity to attract private clients?
Yeah, so that was around more increasing our day service provision and the charges for that. And we've had issues in terms of how we do that with Llyselian around the way the building is structured, how we provide day services over the dementia support that we've got. So we have attracted people, but it hasn't generated the level that we thought we were going to get. So that's part of our review of the model of delivery in Llyselian and what we do going forward. So that saving is more about the way that we run Llyselian in terms of day services.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yeah. I think Reen wants to come in and then Councillor Cath.
Just very quickly, on Betsy Cadwallader, you'll remember they were here before council in October where we had a session. As a follow-up to that, we engaged with health around them coming regularly to our scrutiny meetings. So we're in arrangement, trying to get arrangements in place now for them to come before social care scrutiny. So I think that will be an opportunity maybe for members also to raise these very important issues with the health board, because you know, we're not going to beat around the bush. It is tough, to be honest, and I think there needs to be some probing questions there around how we can develop that relationship better. So and we are in engagement, as Councillor Penny said. We've had regular meetings with the executive of the health board, but we want to develop that further, I think, because it is becoming quite a significant pressure on us. Yeah.
Reen. Okay, we've got Councillor Charlie wants to come in. We've got Councillor Cathy. Before that, just, you know, say how pleasing it is to see so many of our social care colleagues here this morning, and just to say thank you to all of you for the work you're doing. It's as tough as I can ever remember in 18 years. It's the worst. So, okay, we'll go Councillor Cathy and Councillor Charlie.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to add to what has been said from the point of view of children's services, we obviously have Welsh Government continuing care guidance, which means, of course, that morally and legally and in principle, we have to look after our very, very vulnerable young people with complex needs. This, as perhaps Charlie is going to say, is not a Conwy only issue. We're lucky enough that our leader is a rep to the social care committee across the whole of Wales. Social care reps went to a meeting recently, and I challenged Jeremy Miles quite strongly about our relationship, our partnership, the negotiations, as you call them, with Betsy. So we're going to follow that up. I know that Charlie is doing great work on that as well, more broadly. And it isn't just Conwy that has an issue with their health board, although maybe ours is slightly more pronounced. Thank you.
Councillor Cathy. Councillor Charlie.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, really important to remember this isn't a Conwy specific issue. It's an issue across the whole UK. The anomaly when the NHS was founded was that social care wasn't included. It didn't really exist in the form that it does now. And that disparity has just got greater over the years as to who pays for what and what an illness is and what is a social issue. And we know it doesn't work. It's been kicked down the can for years at a UK level. There are moves to talk towards moving towards the sort of just one service for health and social care, and clearly that would be beneficial. If you're having to argue over who pays for what, that's a real waste of officers' time. It's a real waste of money, and more importantly, it's not helping the patient or the resident, whatever you want to call that individual who needs those services. So I guess my frustration is there are many things that we have to deal with which is out of our control, which should happen and should happen more quickly, Chair, because it remains an absolute serious concern about we are using high figures of council tax to support essential services. And that's kind of like, I think there was a bit of an unwritten sort of rule that we had local taxation powers to sort of focus on the things that matter to our residents locally, not statutory services, but that's certainly not been clear for a number of years just because the sums just don't add up. And again, as we move into the budget for next year, you will see that the figures for social care are really concerning as well, but absolutely necessary, and that we have to provide that care. So thanks, Chair.
Yeah, Councillor Charlie. Yeah, it's good to always remember there is a patient or resident in the centre of all this. Thank you. We now go to Councillor Abdul online.
Yeah, apology for being late as well. I've been thrown away. I didn't realize it was 9:30. My question is on page 32, 3.16, where it says the council reserve policy's recommendation is that we hold at least 5% of our budget in reserve. Now, currently we hold less. Are we planning to implement that recommendation in this financial year? I question that to Amanda, please.
Sorry, that's
Whichever.
in the next report, Chair. This is just the reporting on quarter 3, so that will be covered in the next report.
Can that be
Councillor?
answered on next report then, please? Thank you. I am jumping ahead, like I said. My apology for being late.
No,
So-
it's okay.
so-
Don't worry. Don't worry.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll take your question in the next report. We've got Kathy Mackenzie online, then we've got Councillor Gareth in the room.
Bore da. I just want to reassure councillors that from a social care perspective, with the young people in children's services who are eligible for continuing care,
Kathy, could you turn
as
your
a service,
camera
we
off?
are.
It's your
Yeah.
connection's really bad there. Thank you.
There you go.
Okay.
Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes. Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so just to reassure councillors that from a service point of view, we are with every single individual who we perceive to be eligible for continuing care, we are holding Betsy Cadwallader accountable for following the guidance that Councillor Cathy talked about. And certainly, those negotiations are extremely difficult, but when a young person is eligible, then we absolutely must continue negotiating with the local health board, and that's what we do. So we have noted that it is the really high cost placements. They're the young people where that they're originally the hospitals would care for those, but they are now coming into the community, and that's some of the difficulties that we're facing at the moment.
Thank you very much for that further explanation there, Kathy. Really appreciate it. Now we've got Councillor Gareth in the room, then Councillor Anne online. Councillor Gareth.
Thank you. On page 30, as you have mentioned, Amanda, we've had the good news that we had the one-off money of 1.35 million coming in from Park Adver, and probably without that, our shortfall would have been around 2.6 million altogether. You put there that ideally that would have gone into reserves, and as Councillor Abdul said, reserves ideally should be at around the 5% mark. So my first question would be, in pounds terms, how short are we of hitting that 5% reserves? And my second question is that, you've given us the heads up in 3.11.4 that collection of council tax is slowing down. So, that's probably an early indication that people are having difficulty paying. So I just wondered, had we got any data as to, where those pressures were being felt geographically or tax band wise? Is it the second homes areas that's slowing down, so that we can kind of identify where the pressures are in the council as to who's having difficulty paying their council tax at the moment? Thank you.
I was just doing a calculation, so apologies. Just to answer your first question about the 5%. So at the moment, I'm counting in that table on table 2 on page 31, both general reserves plus some specific other reserves, which are sort of in a way set aside for general purposes, to just reflect that at the moment it's 4.36. So it would need to be 5%, it would need to be 14.7. So effectively it's shy about 2 million to get to the 5%. But obviously we will, potentially be using reserves again this year to balance. So in that sense, it'll get eroded. In terms of the council tax, I think I would make this sort of general observation that across Wales, actually, I think council tax is slowing, and certainly Gareth and the team are doing a range of analysis to sort of assess where the collection issue, to the extent where we've got an increased issue, and is it actually in year collection or is it arrears? And so on and so forth. So I don't have the detail with me today in terms of whether, and I don't know actually, if I'm being truthful, whether we've identified it as being an issue, for argument's sake, as you say, with premiums or not. So we can certainly work and get that kind of analysis. What's making it a little bit difficult for us at the moment, just in terms of predicting, is that we have actually, through positive work, recently done a number of things into the council tax debit, as it were, the amount that we raise. One is that we've recently done a review of single person discounts and looked at effectively where I guess people might have erroneously perhaps still been claiming a discount when maybe their eligibility no longer was there. And so on and so forth, and that has raised a debit of about £250,000. We've also been doing an exercise to identify properties that actually should be second homes, which maybe aren't at the moment, and again we've raised some debits in relation to that, and then on the converse, we've also now actioned council's decision around the relief we're giving to foster carers to obviously try and promote that as an attractive thing to do. So all of those things sort of mean that the current position is, we need to sort of see some of those things flow through. But going back to your sort of primary question, we are doing work and analysis to try and actually see where, if there are any specific issues that we need to focus on in terms of the work that the team do in terms of collection, and obviously in the worst case scenarios, the work that the enforcement team do in terms of collection as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda, because I think it's really important, if it is backdated stuff that's causing the slowdown, well, yeah, that's a specific reason. But if our residents in particular areas are having specific issues, then, as you quite rightly point out, it's good that we get an earlier heads up on that as possible, and we've got a better chance of doing something about it then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gareth. Councillor Anne online and Councillor David.
Thanks, Chair, and I'll turn my camera off. Amanda, my first question is in relation to page 30, section 3.11.1, and it's where you highlight schools as potentially being undertaking redundancy ahead of the next financial year. My first question is that one risk or a forecast in terms of schools? I mean, I know last year I think we had 19 redundancies declared in schools in the last year, and I don't think we had any or a handful in terms of any other service. So just wondering if that again is a recurring feature, that redundancy really is significantly affecting schools. And then the second question, and it relates to that again, is in relation to page 34. When I look at the appendix 1, when it comes to schools, it's showing that there's no variance against current budget. Is that because we actually include reserves in that budget for schools and sort of treat them differently, or are reserves included in all other services within this revenue budget? Just trying to be clear what we're equating in terms of variances, because I am aware that a number of our schools are currently overspent in current year, and yet we've got a zero variance. So I wonder if you could just clarify. Thanks, Amanda.
Just on that point then. Well, yes. Essentially, the schools is reported in a way that does then, effectively take in their balances, because they And that's the way it's always been reported here. So in that sense, it recognises the fact that schools set their own budgets, including decisions around using balances. Now, obviously, in terms of comparing it to the council, council services don't set their budgets on an assumption of using balances. So there's a fundamental difference there. But yes, as I referenced when I was talking about reserves, I absolutely recognise that schools' reserves will be being used in the current year to manage the net budget position on schools, because they made those plans. I think that again, then coming back to the question about redundancies, I think, I guess I struggle a little bit in the sense of, I think I understand why you rightly want to seek parity with schools, and a lot of your questions often pursue this issue around why are we treating schools differently than the council, and I guess the reality of the situation is because the arrangements and the legislation around schools is different. So the schools have the power, the governors have the power to make decisions around setting their budget, which we don't have a say in. And therefore, if they have made a decision to use balances in a previous year to balance their budget, but those balances have run out, then that's going to lead to a potential redundancy situation in the current year if there are then falling numbers, falling pupil numbers, etc. And as I say, that's outside of our control as a council, whereas internally or within the council services, I guess that decision isn't allowed effectively because we're being forced through the need to make budget reductions to effectively set balanced budgets that don't use balances. So as I say, whilst I understand the motivation behind your question, the reality is you can never get exact treatment for both schools and the rest of the council because the arrangements and the decisions and the powers of who sets the budgets respectively are different.
Thank you, Amanda.
And could I maybe just come back, Chair?
Yes, you may, Councillor Ann.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of this is a public scrutiny meeting, part of my motivation is always that we seem to misrepresent the school's position because, looking at Appendix 1, it looks as though schools are coping with the budgets that they're given. I mean, although schools technically set a balanced budget, in actual fact, it's the predetermined slice of the pie that the bigger council gives them, and that comes from members' decisions about priority for schools. So there's an awful lot of things that don't appear obvious to the public when we're actually treating all services, and then obviously specifically reporting on schools in the midst of all services. And I think, potentially that's the same situation for us as members as well. Perhaps, some of these reports, and I'm not suggesting it's down to, because I don't know if any other councils in Wales report differently. I mean, I think at the beginning I got a hint that you were suggesting that some schools, some councils report differently. Obviously, I have no idea if that's the case, but it's just this piece about integrity of reporting and actually sort of representing fairly the equivalence of schools to other services, because schools, as I've said earlier, they're given a budget and they're given a budget cut that they have to accept, and that cut comes from us as members, completely accept that. So they have a very tight limit of independence in terms of thought. Yeah, it may be about reserves, but again, this report just shows as though everybody had access to X amount of money and this is how they've performed. And clearly that isn't the case because, as I said earlier, my understanding that a number of schools are overspent in the year to date, and that significantly therefore impacts on their budget for next year. And I completely understand about potentially a lot of schools have used reserves historically. I mean, as we know, that's dwindling. I think the £7 million of reserves is due to go down to about 2 million projected in this next financial year. But, you know, perhaps in terms of reserves, I mean, I don't know if we have the latitude to do it, but we perhaps be treating schools with a bit of a bit of obvious reporting so that you can see, or the public can see as well as members, the exact position that schools are in. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, Councillor
Just as point of clarity, I don't know how other authorities report schools, and I can obviously do some research to see. I'm happy to potentially look at the way we report. Although I would once again observe this is the way it's been reported in time immemorial at Conwy. But yeah, happy to consider future.
I'd appreciate that, Amanda. Thanks.
So we've got Councillor David and then Councillor Simon online. Then we're moving to the recommendations. Councillor David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've already made contact with Amanda and Charlie about a hardship fund for the very poorest pensioners. Now, I've got real concerns about pensioners that are just above the level for pension credit. Pensions are.
This is for the next report, Councillor David.
Oh right, I'll ask it in the next. Is that in the next report? I'll ask it in the next report then. All right. Thanks for correcting me. So I'll come back in the next report and ask this question then. Okay.
No worries,
Cheers. Thank you.
Councillor Simon, last speaker before recommendations. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I don't know if we are in the right section here, but page 30, there's a 3113 mentions the shared prosperity multiply funding.
Right.
Okay. Now, that was stated on BBC Wales Politics yesterday that was coming to an end shortly. I wonder if we're aware if that's correct.
Thank you, Councillor Simon. Councillor Nigel, do you want to answer that? Oh.
Yes, that's correct. It is coming to an end.
So just to clarify, yeah, it's coming to an end next year. It was a 3-year programme. It was renewed for another year. So that's what we're referring to here. We do not as yet have any detail as to what will replace it in the next financial year. So, which is a concern, but it is available for the current year, Chair.
Thank you very much. You content, Councillor Simon? Yes. Thank you. Okay, well, we've got no more speakers, so we will go to the recommendations. Let's have a look on page 27. Have we got anything extra to add to those, and have we got a proposer and a second? Councillor Aaron will propose. Councillor Hannah will second. Members, would you like to show? Very much done. And anyone against? Any abstention? No. Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much, members. We now move on to item 7C, revenue budget 24-25, the draft revenue budget and council tax increase 25-26. This is pages 39 to 270. Councillor Charlie is going to introduce the item and Amanda Hughes is going to present the report. Okay, Councillor Charlie.
Okay, again, thank you, Chair. Once again, thanks to Amanda for a really, really detailed report, which clearly sets out the challenge that we face once again. You will be aware at the start of the year, under the previous government's plans for councils, we were expecting a zero settlement or even a cash negative settlement. Clearly, the situation we're in is far better, but it still remains challenging, as detailed in there. Demand continues to grow. And that is our biggest difficulty, essentially. It's not that we're spending money unwisely, we just have to provide statutory services, and as that demand grows, we have to meet it, Chair. I would remind members of our duty to set a balanced budget. Again, that's quite a complex thing for people to understand. We have to estimate what level of finance we need in the following year. There are lots of unknowns there, but clearly where we see a surge in demand for social care, which we statutorily have to provide, then we have to make allowances for that. Now, the reality is that actually leaves us with very little choices in terms of council tax. It's Amanda here who will have to legally sign, in her professional opinion, that our budget is balanced and it is fit for purpose. Obviously, there are lots of assumptions you have to make in there. There are a few areas you can take a little bit more risk than others, but it remains an absolute challenge. I'm very conscious of the level of council tax that we've levied on residents over the last 2 years. The reason why we're slightly out of step with other authorities, certainly across North Wales, we'd be combined maybe 2 to 3% higher than them, is that we did not have sufficient reserves to meet this challenge. It's very clear if you look at other budgets, they have used reserves. Councillor Gareth, you quite rightly raised the importance of having reserves at an appropriate level. That was not the case when I joined this council in 2017. We historically had very low levels of council tax, which I understand residents really do not like you raising their council taxes. We're all acutely aware, but that left us ill-placed to face the challenge of the size that we have now. So every decision we make is meaningful. We are caught absolutely between a rock and a hard place. Council tax, we know, is incredibly unfair. It impacts on the poorest the most, but those are the residents that need our services the most. So there's a really difficult balance there. And it's a shame that once again, we're in the situation where, we have to go out and take that money away from people who are struggling. We know other utility bills, Welsh Water went up 27%. That's incredibly difficult. The cost of living crisis is still real, but our balance is there's legal services we have to provide. And then there's things that we have some choice about, but that is very, very limited. Our schools, Councillor Anne, you talk about our schools. We know there's a real struggle within our schools, but we've always tried to protect our schools. Last year, we received 2.3% from Welsh Government, and we increased school funding by 4.9%, which is 3.9 million. If we had just passported on the share that we got from Welsh Government, it would have been about half that. So, that is increasingly difficult for us. And I said before, that kind of bond where you raised local council tax for nice to haves, that's long gone. We are raising the council tax to support essential services, and that becomes increasingly more challenging. So I shall let Amanda go through the actual body of the report, Chair, and then obviously I'd be more than happy to take questions. So, diolch.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie. Amanda?
Thank you, Chair. I'll talk through the report in a reasonable amount of detail. So apologies. I appreciate you'll have obviously read the papers, but just to go through for clarity, really. This report obviously builds on reports that you've already seen and reflects some of the previous considerations and decisions, and as I say, I'll talk you through those in detail. So just starting off then in section 4 of the report, which is on page 45, we have received the draft local government settlement, and I've obviously reported this to you before. Across Wales, there was a 4.3% increase, average increase. We received 3.6%, and we're 14th in the ranking, which actually, although in the lower quartile, was actually better than we often do. But essentially, I've set out in table 1 the various movements in the increase, and we effectively in cash terms received an additional £15 million, but obviously that is reflecting some of the things we already have talked about, such as the teachers' pension monies. It's also transferred across to us some additional money for the 2 in development coastal risk management programme schemes. Some grants for housing have been transferred into the settlement, rather than we've received them as grant in the current year. Next year they put them into the settlement, etc. So the reason I'm just mentioning those were items specifically is that the 15 million of cash isn't 15 million of new money. Only a chunk of that is new money, because actually within the 50 million of cash, there's quite a lot of things which are effectively just confirming previous money. So as I say, we've had that additional increase, and that's been carried through, and you've been aware of that in the figures so far. I will just point out, because I think it's relevant to the pressures that we're facing, and the point that Councillor Charlie was just making. I've set out in paragraph 4.5 there that we receive effectively in this draft settlement £1,911 per capita, which comparing to our neighbours, Denbighshire receives 2,215 per capita and Gwynedd receives 2,071 and the Welsh average is 1937. So as compared to our immediate neighbours, we receive less per head count. And if you consider we've got 115,000 residents, you can soon see that effectively if you multiply up a couple of £100 by 115,000, it's getting into substantial differences in funding. The new piece of information about the settlement I've set out in paragraph 4.6, which is that we understand that Welsh Government intends to include a floor arrangement when they publish the final settlement on the 20th of February. And we understand that that floor will be 3.8%. So that actually will be a benefit to Conwy. I think around 8 authorities across Wales will benefit from that floor. And what that means is we, all things being equal, we should be receiving therefore an additional 424,000 in the final settlement as compared to the draft settlement. Because the communication around that, whilst we've not had an official letter, we've had sufficient communication and information about it that I feel confident that at this stage we can assume that we'll get that and we can take that into consideration when we continue or you continue to set the budget. So that's one of the changes to the budgets from the last report that you had in January. So moving then to the table 2 in section 5, what I've detailed here effectively is the figures that you saw in January in the report in January as compared to the forecast now, having taken account of a number of changes. And whilst you can work out what the changes are if you compare the two columns, for ease of reference, because it's a big table, I've actually set out the changes then in table 3, where I've explicitly set out the movement and why the 9.936 resource shortfall that I highlighted in January has now increased to 10.6. And what they are, as I say, are set out in table 5.2 there. The primary upward pressure that we've had since the initial budget or the last consideration is that pressure in older people. Whilst during the year, obviously those people have come into the service and come into that cost obligation for us gradually over this year. But in reality, all of those residents who've been rightfully placed in care homes will be there for the whole of the next financial year. So we have to take account of that pressure. Otherwise we'd be going into next year knowing effectively we would have an overspend in social care from the off. That clearly isn't a sensible thing to do, and therefore I feel duty bound that that I bring that to your attention and that we build that into the budget. So as I say, there's 1.995 been added in, and then fortunately there are a number of things which will help fund that. One is the reduction in the pay award provision that I referenced in the Q3 report, that we have effectively got that spare, so that can help fund it. Equally, a corporate contingency, and then we've also had notification of the corporate joint committee levy. I'd originally set aside 200,000. It actually turns out that it's only going to be about 23,000, and therefore I've been able to take out that budget that I'd set aside that I don't need, and then equally the increase in the AAF. So the net movement of all of those adjustments then is an additional pressure of 664,000, which has therefore moved the 9.936 to 10.6 million. So that's the pressure that we have estimated before effectively. So it's taking account of the AAF, but it's before then the decisions that you take as members around budget reductions and council tax. So just also to just emphasise for understanding, really, in terms of clarity, that we're all on the same page in terms of the what I've assumed in terms of pay costs in those budget figures. And I've set this out to you before, but it's a significant element, and therefore in that context, just to set it out again and for clarity. So I've assumed a pay award for all staff in 25-26. I've estimated that at 4%. You'll be aware, actually, we've got 4 pay groups across the authority, but the 2 main ones are effectively the Teachers' Pay Award and also the NJC Pay Award. The Teachers' Pay Award, we, at this point in time, the independent remuneration panel that gives advice to Welsh Government about the Teachers' Pay Award hasn't given a view about what they think the Teachers' Pay Award would be for next year, but I can observe that in England, the equivalent body has recommended 2.8%. I am not sure it will be as low as that, but I'm hopeful that it will be contained within that 4% headroom, as I say. The NJC, however, is a little bit more worrying in the sense of the NJC pay claim has just recently been submitted, and actually they've submitted a pay claim of £3,000 per spinal point. That's far in excess of the amounts that have been settled in the last 2 years, which have been £1,290 in the current year and £1,950 in the previous year. But the 4% that I've set aside would only actually fund an increase of 1,100. So I'm just drawing that to your attention. So I think there's a degree of risk around that, but at the same time, equally, if there was a 1290 settlement last year, inflation's coming down. I don't necessarily feel that I'm in too far a wrong place, but nonetheless, I'm drawing that to your attention. You'll also know we've had much debate about the national insurance increases. We have been notified by Welsh Government officials, or I've been notified by Welsh Government officials, that we really won't have any clarity about the national insurance position until well into the summer, because I think there are debates going on between Wales and England, and equally there are various considerations going on in Wales as well around the different employment models that different bodies might have, and to what extent it's fair to distribute any funding. But I've made an assumption, pardon me, that we'll get 3.9 million, which is obviously less than the cost that I've built in. So again, just to draw that due attention. So we've got this shortfall then of £10.6 million, and essentially to address that, we can either seek to increase our income, or we can seek to reduce our costs. It's pretty fundamental or pretty basic in that crude sense. So the elements of the budget that we can play with, for want of a better word, and I don't use that word lightly, I just mean the bits that are movable parts, are firstly the business cases. So I set out in paragraph 6.3 on the situation with business cases. So you'll be aware, and you've considered the detailed business cases previously, and they're included obviously in the appendix here as well. But there are £1.424 million of business cases. They have been subject to detailed scrutiny, and as far as the strategic leadership team are concerned, and obviously that's been discussed with portfolio holders, they represent really the essential funding requests that are in place to measure, to address specific risks that we're facing as a council. At your last meeting, that was sort of endorsed, as it were, and Cabinet at its last meeting recommended that all of those business cases are supported in full. So I've just confirmed there in paragraph 6.6 that this budget proposal therefore leaves those £1.424 million business cases fully intact, as it were. So moving on to budget reductions, again, we had a number of budget working groups to look at the budget proposal, the budget reduction proposals that services were bringing forward. Some of those felt okay and reasonable to those budget working groups, some of them less so. Obviously, that then was came through the democratic process in terms of finance and resources, looking at them last time. And again, at this point now, then that Cabinet are recommending that 2.517 million of budget reductions are included in the budget across services. I'd also just draw your attention to the fact that I should have mentioned it earlier on in terms of the pressures, really, but just for everyone, members' clarity, just because I was talking to one member and I obviously hadn't made it aware previously. One budget reduction from last year, or in the current year, 24-25, which was a budget reduction for weeding and spraying. You'll recall that a decision was taken in the last year's round to reduce that to once a year. I think there has been some unintended consequences to that. I think, and consequently, that has been added back into the budget this year in recognition that actually it turned out to not be perhaps a good decision in retrospect, and therefore it's been reversed in this budget proposal. For clarity. So as I say, this budget now includes those £2.517 million of budget reductions, and the detail of that is set out in Appendix 6. Also, from the last meeting, on the back of the last meeting, it was agreed that there would be a school-specific budget working group, and that was held, and it considered a range of data, financial and non-financial data, and also the working group heard the perspectives of a representative group of head teachers. And so following that meeting, and in light of obviously discussions and the feedback from members who attended, as well as the public budget consultation, which is set out later in the report, this budget proposal effectively doesn't reduce, or rather passes fully on the funding that's required for schools to remain at a standstill budget. So in other words, it will passport on more funding than we as an authority had proportionately for schools. So schools will be funded at standstill, and therefore no what would have been perceived as a budget reduction previously, but no budget reduction to be applied. I would just clarify, however, that the school's budget has been adjusted for falling pupil numbers, and that's an automatic adjustment that happens every year. If pupil numbers go up, the budget goes up. If pupil numbers go down, the budget goes down. So that has been applied as normal, but otherwise the schools will be funded at standstill. Moving on then to reserves and balances, obviously that's an option in terms of funding budgets, and certainly many other councils in Wales are using using reserves and balances to help their budget and meet their budget equation, as it were. We've had many discussion around the adequacy of our budgets, of our reserves, and that continues. And certainly I have recommended previously, and I know Councillor Gareth has recommended, and the Froscas endorsed, and Cabinet have endorsed the need for us to seek to build reserves. In terms of this budget proposal, there is no planned use of reserves and balances in this budget proposal for all the obvious reasons that we've already discussed. And equally, there is no permanent budget set aside to build reserves in this budget proposal. But what I would clarify, or for point of clarity, and it goes to points raised previously by Councillor Abdul, etc. This budget does allow for one-off money to be put into reserve. So as part of the pressures within this budget. There is the capital financing costs relating to the 25-26 capital programme, which obviously need to be built into the budget because that's an obligation that's being created by the 25-26 capital programme. But in 25-26, those costs won't actually be incurred because capital financing costs follow in the year after the year of the capital programme. So essentially, that money will be available to help build reserves in next year. It is also the case that we may well receive further income from the packaging income that's coming in for plastic packaging than I've allowed in the budget. And again, to the extent that there is excess money, and notwithstanding there might be a call from ERF, which we might have to consider in year, but notwithstanding that, then again, any additional income can go into the balances. So as I say, there's no permanent budget provision for building reserves, but there is one-off provision to do that. So hopefully in 25-26 we can build reserves to some extent. And then moving finally then on to the final bit of the equation, and that is council tax. Well, actually, it's not the final bit, but sorry, just to go to council tax next. You'll note, just for clarity to start off with, obviously within our budget, the North Wales Fire Authority, Rescue Authority levy sits within our budget. They have set a budget which requires us to effectively raise our council tax by 0.68% in order to raise the money to fund that Fire Authority increased levy. And then we then need funding to effectively meet the rest of the budget from the council services point of view. I've pointed out before and again, just for clarity, within the Welsh Government settlement, when they do their calculations, they have effectively modelled an increase of 10.26% in council tax. That's not to say that Welsh Government are telling us to increase our council tax by 10.26%, because clearly it is local decisions based on local priorities. But I'm just pointing out that that's what they have assumed within their calculations. So in the context of the remaining shortfall that we have of 10.6 million, less the identified reductions of 2.517, there is a remaining shortfall of 8.083 million, and a 1% increase in council tax raises 795,000. Therefore, if we were to meet that from council tax alone, it would require a 10.17% increase. However, we are confident that during next year we will be in receipt of around 0.6 million of one-off grant income, and therefore if we allow for that one-off grant income, the remaining shortfall becomes 7.473 million, and that would require then a council tax of 8.72 for council services plus the 0.68 for fire, and therefore there's a proposed increase in this budget proposal to uplift council tax by 9.4%, which will close that gap then. I set out in table 4 how that would impact on individual council tax bands in terms of those that are in the biggest groups of council tax bands, so bands B, C and D, and also then what it would mean if you had a single person discount and or if you had council tax reduction. As I say, I've referenced already the one-off income that we'll get, but effectively I've summarised therefore in table 5, paragraph 6.37 on page 53, the the specific reductions then, or the specific, elements that meet that resource shortfall of 10.6 million. So as I say, it effectively will be coming from, in this proposal, 2.517 of budget reductions, 537 to fund the fire, 6,936 to fund council services, and 610 £1,000 of one-off income. I would draw your attention obviously to that one-off income in the sense of obviously that does mean that the underlying budget gap relating to that 610,000 continues and exists and will carry through into the 26-27 budget when it will need to be found. So just for point of clarity. I've set out in section 7 the budget consultation, some high level, obviously the budget consultation is in a detailed appendix, but I've just set out some high level information in this, in appendix 1 in the report for information. You can see in paragraph 7.2 there, I've listed effectively the top 5 services that come through from our residents. Note essentially that all services are supported by our residents. It's not that anyone views anything as being unimportant, but these are the ones that ranked the highest. And what I've done in table 6 is I've sought to illustrate how the additional funding that we will be getting in as a council, which essentially is the income from the additional settlement, the council tax, the increased premium that we've built in, the plastic income grant that we've built in, the one-off income, etc. There's effectively in cash terms of new money, as it were, we'll be receiving 27 million, and I've demonstrated in the top half of table 6 there how we've allocated, how this budget allocates that 27 million to the service areas, and you can see effectively that essentially the vast majority, or rather the money essentially has been allocated to social care, to schools and central education, environment, roads and facilities, and treasury management, which is the crump scheme, etc. And pretty much that's where our funding has been allocated, and that accords with the priorities of people in terms of the survey. So hopefully that's useful. Moving on then just to talk about the outlook for beyond 25-26, so 26-27, 27-28. I've set that out again in the one of the appendices. There's a more detailed medium-term financial plan, but I've just brought into this appendix 1 the high-level information. So you'll see in table 7 that essentially, even assuming a 1% increase in the settlement in the next 2 years after next year, we are facing once again still very significant and substantial shortfalls in those years. And I really would also point out that I've only assumed 2.5% in terms of pay awards for 26, 27 and 27, 28. It's who knows in reality whether they're realistic or not. But I guess I'm making the observation because I think if they're going to go anywhere, they'll go up, not down, and therefore those pressures are only going to increase, not decrease. So we can continue to see essentially, and it comes back to the point Councillor Charlie made. We are effectively still being faced with significant cost pressure because of those statutory services and the increasing demand of those statutory services that we are obliged both morally and legally to provide. So unfortunately the challenges don't go away, and the reason I am obviously telling you this is because you have to bear that in mind in terms of the decisions in the current year for setting the 25-26 budget. I've also then, as you'll be familiar with, set out the risks that are inherent within the figures to make sure that you're aware of those. And obviously I've equally set out again the risk of a Section 114 notice, and whilst hopefully hopefully there is a proposal in front of you that will go in front of council, which hopefully provides the ability to set a balanced budget. But obviously, if members don't support a proposal that sets a balanced budget, then we would obviously be into a Section 114 position. So in terms of the next steps, obviously you'll be considering this now. Cabinet will be recommending a budget proposal on to council, which obviously meets on the 27th next week, and for members on the 27th to effectively agree and set a balanced budget. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for that really comprehensive run through. You can breathe now. It's okay. Okay, members, let's open it up for questions and observations. No. Whoa, all the hands go up. Councillor Paul, you won just there. Then Councillors Gareth and Louise. Councillor Paul. And hold your mic up for those members online. Thanks, Paul.
The poorest UK and Welsh households are paying a rising share of their income on council tax. And as Charlie said, have been particularly hard hit by the 23% increase in water rates, which is painful for everybody. I'd really like ask this question to both Charlie and Amanda. If a small group of us could get together and really, to use Louise's terms, drill down on whether we can do anything more within the powers that local authorities have to assist these households on the lowest incomes and lowest wealth. So that's a question. Can we do that? The second point I'd like to make, and Charlie knows that I will, when it comes to council, vote for 9.4% council tax. That's not an issue for me. But in terms of my own preference, I would have preferred a higher council tax. Now, I know the politics on this is difficult, because I suspect in each of the groups in the administration, there would have been opposition to a higher council tax. But my view is the one-off income grant that we're going to use for the 0.610 million, that only again is sort of kicking the can down the road, because it's incorporating a shortfall for the next year. And as Amanda has said and Charlie said, there's no indication from Welsh government or UK government that they're going to come over the hill and rescue us in future years. And I think I'm with local council taxpayers who say we must ourselves sort of take charge in trying to build back our broken public services. And so I would have preferred if we had a higher council tax this year, purely to ensure that financial resilience, and particularly to have paid some money into transforming services, because I just don't think with our reduced staff and resources within departments, we can do the work to transform services without some additional monies. And as people know, my major concern is to tackle the issues around our school estate and getting greater efficiency and effectiveness there. So my question really is, yes, 9.4%, and I suspect there will be a majority for that at council. But I think again, we are not being bold enough in ensuring Conway is as strong as possible going into another 2 or 3 torrid years, I anticipate, with the financing of public services. So just those 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Paul. Councillor Charlie, you're going to answer those 2. The first one was around the small group of us to drill down to assist households on the lowest income.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So obviously there are 55,000 households in Conway, around 22,000 of those get single person discount. And we have 10,500 households who get council tax reduction scheme, and then they would be our most vulnerable and most poorest. Many of those don't pay council tax. I'm always slightly wary we start veering into opening up the who you give that support to, because you'll always have a cutoff point with giving out additional money. Now, I experienced that as an NHS dentist. It was either 100% free. If you had £1 more, you had to pay for the whole thing. There was no sort of gradation there, so that is a problem. But I think it's a bigger problem than this council can solve by looking at that and deciding to give somebody 100 quid and somebody not. I just think that in terms of the admin, in terms of the rules, in terms of how it would actually work, I just don't think it would be that good an idea. Council tax is a really poor system, isn't it? We see sort of Mayfair in London, they've got ridiculously low levels of council tax. You'll see really poor areas where it's 4 or 5 times that amount. Conway's council tax figure is still significantly below the English average for councils, despite what you might see in social media. We have moved up. We're now the 6th highest in Wales, but if you balance that along the side, that we have often been at the bottom in terms of funding per capita, we're now up to 14. When you look at that balance, that's hardly surprising, isn't it? We have to deliver services for significantly less than our neighbours. And I would make the case that you're seeing real pressures there in terms of our elderly demographic, which is driving, and that is just not reflected in the current funding formula because we just do not receive it. We've seen between the last census and this one, a 20% increase in the number of over 65s in Conway. We've seen a 4% increase in the number of under 18s. You're seeing across Wales, or the 19 local authorities, relative depopulation, which is incredibly challenging. We have an issue with the schools. You're absolutely right. You lose 2 or 3 children out of that class, you lose that funding. But that's incredibly difficult to make that saving till there's a tipping point where you can close a school or amalgamate or whatever that is. That's really, really challenging in the interim. But we know that this is a very popular area for people to retire to. If people do retire here, and I think, again, that's borne out by our census data, that's an immediate cost if they require assistance. We know that 47% of the people we look after are under 85. That's in a really low band in terms of the formula. They are more likely to need support earlier because they haven't got the family support groups around us. So it remains incredibly challenging. In terms of how we face the future, it is really worrying. You'll be aware of the Welsh Audit Report that highlighted that all local authorities were going to struggle. But clearly, if you're reliant on 70% of your funding from government, and you have to follow the rules, and that funding doesn't keep pace, there comes a point where you cannot do that. You just physically can't do it anymore. And council tax is now being used to pay for essential services. So given the balances and checks that we have to look at, there is a figure, it'd be easier to make it higher. It would give us more resilience. Yes, it would, but that's coming directly out of people who are already struggling to pay. So it's all about balance. I would like to spend a lot more. We talk about schools not taking a cut this year, but that's a standstill budget. We know there's reduction in numbers. We know there's a huge increase in the need within society for young people. And ideally, you'd be putting more money into schools, not just saying, we haven't cut the schools. So it is really, really difficult. I think a budget that pleases nobody in terms of this chamber is probably about right in terms of we've all got different priorities. But I know our residents won't thank us at all for this. But equally, if there were people sleeping homeless in the streets of Conway, if there were people not getting out of hospital, if people weren't being cared properly, then we would take the criticisms for that. And that is exactly why we have to set a balanced budget, taking all of that into consideration. And it is incredibly challenging. So thank you.
You content, Councillor Paul? Thank you. We'll now move to Councillor Gareth, please.
Thank you. I'll start off by saying what I think is good about the budget, which is the standstill funding for education. I think that's absolutely the right thing to do, and definitely based on the reports from our residents, where education came out at number one as far as the funding is concerned. And I'd like to thank Councillor Julie for asking the heads, or some of the heads, to come in and talk to us in the school budgets, the special school budget meeting, which really brought home to us the pressures that the schools were under. And I certainly think it helped us all move from that initial thought of possibly cutting the education budget by 5%. And as you mentioned, Leader, yes, it doesn't give them any more money to work with, but at least it doesn't mean that their budgets are being cut. Looking at the information in there, I think a big part of the issue we're facing this year, by the look of it, Amanda, is the rise in national insurance. Because, you know, from your figures there, we're looking at having to find an extra 6.6 million on national insurance. We're budgeting to get 3.9 million. So, you know, the reality of that, I think, is 3.6% of that council tax increase is national insurance. So, you know, it's money we're taking and we're actually sending it off to Westminster, and our residents are having to find it in that way. And, you know, my question around the national insurance is the fire service increase is 0.68%, but that also will include a level of national insurance for the firefighters. We should get that back, if I'm right. We should get that back through the funding. Is that included within the 3.9%? Or, you know, or will we have that windfall there? And on the on the subjects of windfalls, yeah, hopefully our one-off windfall income will actually prop up our reserves this year, because it's definitely something that's actually needed. In past years, you know, we had that 1.35 million from Park Adver. That was actually used, instead of going into reserves, was actually used to fund budget shortfalls. So hopefully, you know, again, this year coming, we have to hit our budgets. Otherwise, the same thing is going to happen again. The shortfalls are going to be propped up by one-off payments and dipping into reserves again. You know, the 9.4% is quite an eye-watering amount, but if you look at it over 3 years, we're looking at a 31.2% council tax increase in Conwy over 3 years. You know, it mentions the 9.4 is on a par with the rest of Wales. My guess is, without crunching all the numbers, 31.2% over 3 years is probably leading in Wales, if not the UK. We've got risks there, which I think we should be building into those budgets, like severe weather and things. We seem to see those every year. We had some really good feedback coming back from our residents about the budgets, which is prioritising education. It wasn't quite so positive about carbon reduction and active travel, yet we're still ploughing ahead, building a bridge from Betws-y-Coed to nowhere. We're still ploughing ahead with active travel to Llandudno Junction. You know, that's over 20 million pounds. And the borrowing on our element, the 10% that we have to find, I calculate is what, 160,000 a year out of our revenues. Personally, I'd much prefer to see that 20 odd million being spent on school buildings, on education, on being able to restructure schools. So, you know, my biggest disappointment is, again, our residents talk about AI, structural changes, transformation. There is, a bit like Councillor Paul, there is no budget in there for transformation, for changing things, because it will cost money initially, but we need the payback from that. But we need to have budgets, which is probably going to have to come out of reserves We need the reserves to be able to set up these, you know, if you like, spend to save transformation projects. If schools are going to restructure, that's a huge amount of work. It's not something that that happens overnight. And it's probably, I guess, they haven't got the manpower to actually focus on these structural changes. You know, and also you need those backup resources within the legal team and everything else. But we need to be able to cost them out. And I think we should be setting budgets and targets for these AI transformations, structural changes and things like that. And I would say, you know, we should have done this years ago. And this is why we're finding, because we haven't done this, this is why we're finding now that, again, we're looking at a 9.4% tax council tax increase, because we are between a rock and a hard place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gareth. Councillor Charlie, you're going to
add. Yeah, just a couple of things in terms of who's been the highest council tax over the last 2 years. I think Pembrokeshire takes that dubious honour, but it's very clear when you look at councils who've been in that position that there's a couple of common themes. That they get low funding per capita. That's absolutely what's happened to Conwy. We are 16% less than our neighbours in Denbighshire. If you look at Data Wales and tick every box, we're at 97% match for Denbighshire. In terms of our child poverty, we're within 0.3% of Denbighshire. The only significant difference we have is we have a lot more retired people than Denbighshire. And as we've already highlighted, the cost of looking after an ageing population is really considerable. So that sets you at a massive disadvantage. You're heading about £30 million a year. That then feeds into having no reserves. Clearly, if you've had to provide services without that additional cash year after year after year, you're in quite a difficult position. When Conwy was set up in '96, it started with a really low council tax rate. It's similar to Pembrokeshire. People don't care how much you're paying, they just care about that percentage. So despite that there's lots of other councils charge far more than us, it's just you put it up 10%, you put it up 10%. You can say we're still cheaper than lots of other people, but that's not what the public sees. And I think it's really important when we're looking at these figures. Yes, you know, the actual figure is 8.7 for us and 6.8 for fire. That's been the same in the last 2 years. And fire have gone up, I think it was 10% one year, 10% the next year, and it's 7% this year. Now that's pretty much in line with what we've been doing, because there are inflationary pressures there, but you don't get we just get called with clowns, we can't manage your budget, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you look at other public sector bodies, that this is exactly the same trajectory they're following. Health service spending is now up to 55% of the Welsh Government budget. Before devolution, it was way, and that was across England. It's not a political thing. It used to be about 35, and it's now up to 55. So the pressures on public service and pressures on man are absolutely real. And I think where we do, there'll be 22 authorities in Wales bringing budgets forward. There'll be oppositions saying it's a disgrace, this budget, yada, yada, yada. And I think we do ourselves a great disservice. And to be honest, the numbers are absolutely clear that local government is undervalued and underfunded and has been for a number of years. And that problem will not go away. We're just the ones at the bottom trying to shuffle the cards, trying to make the best out of it. People talk about AI all the time. I've yet to see a real concrete thing. Someone say, you put your money in this, this will save you money. I think it's really early. It's just held up that there's something we have to do. So that is really, really difficult. But we need the correct funding to provide the appropriate services in a face of increasing need. And that is more challenging, but I just think squabbling over the highest here and the highest there doesn't actually address the root of the problem, is that local government is underfunded significantly. And I think it's the fact that spending in the NHS has gone up so high is because we're losing that ability to prevent people going into hospitals. We provide domiciliary care, our leisure centres keep them fit and well and healthy, we keep them in employment, we keep houses over the head. If you keep chipping away at that, then the net outcome is that you're going to have more sick people and more burden on the NHS. So, you know, that's where I'm at.
I don't know if you wanted to answer about the National Insurance for Fire Authority, Charlie or Amanda.
Yeah, I'll perhaps address that as a technical issue. Yeah, so in that context, obviously the levy that we've been levied by the fire includes their national insurance obligations, and the funding I've assumed will be all the funding that we get. So as I've set out effectively what I've assumed in terms of the funding for the national insurance is that Welsh Government have announced that they have 109 million, and therefore for local government, and therefore I've taken what we would get as our average share of that, which therefore covers and includes Spire. You know, to the extent we get more, then fantastic. To the extent we get less, then we're in trouble, sort of thing.
Yeah, so am I right in thinking roughly about 3.6% of our council tax increase is down to the national insurance increase?
Well, yeah,
or the shortfall between what we're getting from Welsh government
yeah, I mean,
and what
essentially,
we're going to have to pay.
Essentially, because yeah, if we're effectively, I'm assuming a funding shortfall of about 2.5 million-ish, aren't I? So yeah, if you divide that by 795, then yeah, you're 3% or whatever.
Yeah, which goes back to Councillor Charlie's point. There's not a lot we can do about that. We're dealt those cards, and we have to either cut services or raise council tax to cover it. Thank you.
Sorry, just I forgot, Gareth, your point about carbon reduction schemes and the cycle path in the Conwy Valley. We put forward 3 levelling up schemes to the former UK government. One was regeneration, economic regeneration in Llandudno, one was the Areas Park, and we were asked to put a transport one in. That was selected by UK government at the time. Clearly that was a bigger priority for them. So that is grant funded. It wasn't the choice. Well, we were asked to put it forward. It was selected. There's £20 million there. There are lots of people who will value that. I take your point about it's if you were doing it with your own money in inverted commas, but just to be clear, that was a governmental choice. It wasn't a choice of this council per se.
Thank you very much, Councillor Charlie. We've got Councillor Louise, then online, Councillor David and Councillor Atts. Councillor Louise.
Dear Chair. Yeah, I feel your frustration, Charlie, in trying to come together with a balanced budget. But I do agree with Gareth that we kind of need to be more radical, particularly with school amalgamations. I agree with Paul about that. I can't believe that figure, 3.6% for national insurance. Thought that wasn't supposed to be a tax on working people, but we'll have that political argument at full council. I have a question about the reserves. Just wanted to be clear. 6.21. We talk about it is likely when we get to the end of the financial year that reserves which are currently earmarked for service use will need to be returned.
Could you ask Louise to speak into the microphone, please?
Can't wait to get to Coimbra now. So the reserves currently earmarked for service use, which will need to probably be returned because we need to find 1.2-ish million. What's that? Which service is that going to affect, please, Amanda?
Thank you. There are a number of service-related earmarked reserves that are set aside, and that came to that was part of the outturn report. So effectively, there was a detailed report which set all of those out, and effectively decisions were taken in the summer around which of those at that point were returned and which of those remained. Now, of those that remained, and they affect pretty much all services. I think they're spread across all services. I think the services that have got the most earmarked reserves are economy and culture, ERF. I think they're the biggest ones. Social care don't have much. Education don't have much. But the ones that were left either for a specific issue or because there was already an obligation against them. Pardon me. That when we close down the accounts this year, I'll bring those back again. And I guess what I'm suggesting in here is that where decisions last year might have been to retain them for a specific purpose because that may be an absolutely valid or worthwhile thing. You know, I guess I'll be asking members to consider whether that can continue to be the case, or in fact whether you need to actually now reprioritize and bring them back to protect the overall resilience of the authority. Apologies because I haven't got the detail in front of me. But as I say, I think the services that would be affected the most would be economy and culture, and ERF.
So I suppose those are the two services where what their savings for this year are their savings, but essentially they're trying to increase their fee, increasing their fees, which is always has an impact not just on residents, but of people actually then not being able to do certain activities or apply for certain some things, particularly within ERF. So I noticed within the leisure business case there has been an equality impact survey, but I noticed in the ERF increase in fees and charges, which covers things such as allotments and cost for street works and parking charges, there's the phrase is there's no adverse impact, and I really do question that. So my issue is obviously we are relying on costs going up and people continuing with those services if they're going to lose their reserves. I suppose it's just a point really, is yet another pressure on residents, and with council tax, Charlie, you know, people are paying more and the perception is they're getting less. It depends what services you use in the council. I agree with that. And what connection. Some people have very little connection with council services other than seeing their bins being collected. But I think other people it has a real impact on them. So it is a hard sell. And personally on council tax, it's a political hot potato. The last Prime Minister that tried to change it, not based just on asset value, but on income and people in the household, soon found herself out of a job. So it was going to be a challenge for any government to do that, but I think it does need doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Louise. We now go to Councillor David online.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It is welcome to putting the money back into sort of for the weeds, for the treatment for that, you know, and I think that'd be welcome by the public. It's not a large amount of money, but really, you know, it is necessary that we do that. So I welcome that. I also welcome the increase for domiciliary care and for the nursing and residential homes. They've got the increases, the national insurance. They're not going to be compensated directly, so indirectly, you know, by giving a reasonable increase in fees, we are doing that, and we really do need to do that because we are responsible. Although I think 90% of our domiciliary care is within the private sector, we're responsible, and you know, if things went wrong and these agencies couldn't carry on, then we would have to take that up. So, you know, so really, I'm very grateful, you know, that we've done that, you know, that we our responsibility to social care, you know, so I'm happy about that. On hardship, really, I mean, for particularly for older people that have lost their winter fuel allowance and are not eligible for pension credit, just above the limit of pension credit, you know, and all these big bills. I know a lot of us had water bills yesterday, massive increases in water bills, got increases in gas and electric, you know, wiping out any increase in the state pension. I think for the very poorest pensioners, I think we do. I did actually, as I said earlier, I did actually sort of contact Amanda and Charlie about this, that we do need to set up a hardship fund. I think they've done that in Manchester, you know, really to try to help them. You know, not a large amount of money, maybe as a starting 50,000 to put into it to help those very poorest people that are really going to struggle and not able to have the gas and electric on, you know, and the weather's still cold again today, isn't it, really? So that's what I'm looking for. Maybe it could be introduced to the cabinet if the political was there tomorrow to actually put in a hardship fund to help those very, very poorest pensioners that are just not eligible for pension credit, but I've got less than say 15,000 coming in, that they're really going to struggle with all the big bills, and the fire authority as well. That's yet another, and it's added to our council tax bill. And as a councillor, a town councillor in Bay of Colwyn Town Council, that's gone up as well, even the precept for that. And it's a good example of Labour and Conservatives working together when they both voted to put the precepts up. And I don't think there's any real need for that actually, within the context of the reserves that the town council had. So it's more paying out all the time for people. And I'm just worried that some of the elderly people are not going to be able to afford to buy food, not going to be able to afford to have the gas and electric on. I think we do need a hardship fund. We do need something there to help the poorest pensioners. And perhaps Charlie could address that one. Thank you.
Charlie?
Yeah, no, David, you know, you took the time to ring me and discuss this. I think there is merit in the idea, but again, I think it's really difficult to set arbitrary tools. We know there's many young families really struggling as well, but I think it's something we can certainly look to discuss. You did kindly send me the link to Manchester. I guess it would be about getting a better understanding of how that could possibly work what it would cost, where you'd set your sort of lines as to who got it, who didn't get it. But yeah, it can't be part of this budget given the stage we're at. But maybe it's something we could bring through democracy at a later date if members felt it was affordable and something we wanted to look into. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie. Okay, next we've got Councillor Anne.
Thanks, Chair. And I'm going to have to turn my camera off. I mean, I, like Louise, have great sympathy for Charlie. I've been there in terms of in Cabinet trying to balance the budget and, you know, face and rationalise what are the difficult decisions. I presume all credit is due to him because this year we've come out as 14th best funding settlement as opposed to bottom with Monmouthshire last year. And I would imagine that that's in considerable part due to his lobbying of Welsh Government and other people. So I would thank him for that. I'd also recognise, like I think Gareth has, that, you know, yet again, Amanda has tweaked the format of this report to make it more digestible, I would suggest. And I don't think it's ever been as clear and understandable and transparent as she's done it. So, you know, fair play to that. And as ever, you know, great work. I suppose, you know, part of where I'm going to go to now is we've now had a resident survey, and again, Gareth said that says schools are up front, albeit the numbers that have completed the report are a bit of a disappointment. So perhaps that needs to be reevaluated in terms of what we do this time next year. But obviously, schools are a #1 priority, and I think at a recent member schools budget forum, many members on the back of listening to the pleas of head teachers and the insight that they gave us into how powerless, if not dangerous, their current budget levels are, and the stress that's involved on them on the back of that. There is obviously due to the pressures. And we talk a lot about pressures, but sometimes apart from ALN, we don't quantify them, I don't think, in terms of schools. And I have to say, many members were moved by listening to the head teachers, and I think they were very professional in their feedback to us. But many members also actually express a willingness to increase the school budget rather than just have a standstill budget. I mean, I appreciate the work that's gone in and the listening that's taken place to actually propose a standstill budget for schools. But, you know, schools are overspending like Billy. I've already made 19, 20 people redundant this time last year. God only knows what the figures will be. I can only assume that they will be higher this year. And, you know, it's that cliff edge that they're facing, that we know they're facing, that makes me think we've got a moral obligation to do something more positive than just consider not giving them a budget cut. So, I mean, I look at on page, I think it's 54, how all of the decisions potentially within this report, how it sort of allocates the funding that we have at our disposal, and this is about our decisions now, isn't it? And the decisions that we'll potentially take on the at full council in a couple of weeks' time. And you know, it doesn't look. I mean, it's quite considerable the differences in funding, and obviously education or schools isn't #1 there in terms of the allocation of resources. And, you know, I have no problem with actually accepting full on the sort of social services pressures. But it's a bit about these hidden pressures that schools face that never seem to materialise because they can't materialise in business cases. I mean, there are business cases, I think, to the extent of £14.5 million within the allocations going on here. And again, they've all got merit, and some SLT have actually said are absolutely unavoidable. And again, I don't argue with that. But the underlying thing here that says, I don't think a standstill budget with this reallocation of resources within Table 6 on page 54 is enough, and therefore what I would like to do, I would actually like to propose that we note the proposal within this report in terms of the budget. But I would actually like to propose, and hopefully people would support this, that actually as members we're provided with a second option balanced budget for the 27th of February, which gives our schools a 1% increase, i.e. it's about 800 grand. Amanda previously reported this as being equivalent to a 1% increase in council tax. And we've obviously had a conversation on the back of Louise's and Gareth's point about, you know, if we're looking at a 4% increase in council tax, 3.5% of that is literally written away by national insurance. And we have to take some responsibility for some difficult decisions. And that also includes being fair to our schools. And actually, I don't think this budget is actually fair enough. It's better to not have any budget cut, but schools are overspending. So I would actually like to propose that Cabinet and SLT provide a second option balanced budget, giving our schools a 1% increase, and hopefully it would have support. And therefore members would have a choice, a real choice, based on the people who've got all the information at their fingertips, if we were to reprioritise schools within the proposals that we put forward for full council on the 27th of February. Thanks, Chair.
Very much that, Councillor Anne. Councillor Charlie, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I was a parent governor before I joined this council. I've been a governor in Esco Glangala and Emersopuan since 2017. So I think there's 48 members of this chamber are school governors, one form or other. We know the situation in some schools is worse than others. We know how difficult it is. We know what demand is. But if we look at our per capita funding for schools, we're 7th in the whole Wales of the 22 local authorities. Clearly, there's the more rural you are, the higher you are up in that list. So again, it comes back to balance. If we are at the upper end of funding across the 22 local authorities, then there's an element of fairness to our residents as well about where that council tax goes. To put another 1% in the schools would raise the council tax above 10%, 10.4. And I think that's a burden too far. It's embarrassing enough to have to go out and ask for 9.4. So I just think there has to be a little element of everyone cutting the cloth. And I appreciate where you're coming from. But within the realms of producing a balanced budget that's fair to everybody, I think personally that this is the fairest that we can do, the best that we can do. But I do appreciate where you're coming from.
Wants to pop in here?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Adam. As the leader has said, I think we can all understand the point that's been made. I guess from a technical point of view, to quote a previous Section 151 officer, this is a process rather than an event. So we have come to the point now that you have a proposal before you, which has gone through quite a lot of rigor. And I think we're reaching the point now that it is for Cabinet, following this meeting, taking on board what is said here, to propose a budget to council. That's the process that we have to follow in line with our constitution. If any individual member wants to make a proposal which is different to that, they have a perfect right to do so, and that can be done at full council. I guess from an SLT point of view, the business cases, as you referred to, have been scrutinised. They have been brought before a working group. They have been scrutinised in FROSC. They've been scrutinised by Cabinet. They are now coming back for the 3rd time, I think, to this meeting. So all the information is before all the members, and if an alternative budget is to be proposed, it is to be proposed. That is absolutely the right of any individual member to do so. But to rehash now, I think it's too late in the process, personally. And if, Councillor Anne, you want to make a proposal to full council, you have the right to do so, and you have the information. All the information is before you here, following all the scrutiny that's gone over the past, I think, 4 months. So from my perspective, I think this is a process now that has to, in accordance with our constitution, to go through a process of Cabinet recommending a budget to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Reen. Councillor
Can I come back, Chair?
Yeah, Yes, Councillor Julie is just going to pop in there, Councillor Anne, just to clarify a couple of points, and if you want to come back at the end of that.
Thank you, Chair Deal. Yeah, obviously I share your sentiment, Anne, in terms of I have an absolute thorough understanding as to the pressure that schools are under. And it was very emotive to hear the head teachers, and I massively appreciated their honesty when they came along to the budget working group. I'm visiting schools practically daily at the minute to talk to head teachers and senior leadership teams with governors, chairs of governors at times to understand the pressures within schools. But the budget is the budget. You know, we were in a position where we thought one point it might be a 5% reduction, then it was 3%, 2%, 1%, and then we have worked incredibly hard to get that down to zero. After listening to schools and understanding the position that they're in, I think this is incredibly fair. Yes, in an ideal world, as the leader said, we would have additional funding, but that's funding that comes from elsewhere that's beyond our control. If we had additional funding, that would be going into schools. But we're in the position we're in where we have to understand that there is a bigger picture. And if we begin to reduce services elsewhere, that also has an impact on our schools. It has an impact, obviously, if we can't provide that support, whether that's through social care, whether that's through homelessness and housing. We have to find a way of doing it that supports schools to the absolute best of our ability with the finances we have. And I truly believe that's what we've done here, and we've fought hard to make sure that we can. We've overturned every stone, we've looked at everything, and we have been in meetings repeatedly. I also have the strategic school working group, which a number of members from across the council are part of. That will, as we move forward, address some of the concerns that have been raised here today in terms of the school footprint across the council. But in terms of where we stand, I agree with what the Chief Executive has said. We've had many months of discussion. This is what's before us, and I truly think fair, for me, is the appropriate word. Yes, obviously, in an ideal world, we could, as I said, find funding from whether that was UK government, Welsh government, to fund schools further, but we're not. We're in the position where this is the budget we have, and I believe this is fair, and we've worked hard. We've listened to obviously those who have filled out the consultation around the budget, our residents. We've listened to our head teachers, to our governors. We've listened to members, and this is where we're at. And I think that this is appropriate and fair. And I appreciate, obviously, I don't make proposals in this forum today, but I will be supporting this as we move forward as a fair and appropriate way of listening to everybody and coming up with the best that we possibly can. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Julie, and thank you for coming to Yscol Gwyn-Jones with me the other week to discuss the huge pressures we're facing for ALN pupils of our youngest ages. And I echo what's been said about the head teachers. That was incredibly powerful. I think everyone was pretty moved by the plight of our schools. So thank you. Councillor Anne, you want to come back in?
Yeah, I do. And obviously I'm not surprised that Cabinet would not be happy to think about bringing forward a choice for full council because of the work that they've done and the beliefs that they personally hold. But I would say as scrutiny, and obviously we're all the time trying to improve scrutiny and the role of scrutiny, we're here to scrutinise. And despite, elements of this report being shared along the way, a lot of it has been done sort of in not silos, because that's probably not the right word, but at different stages, and the way it happens. But however, here today we see the bigger picture, as Julie calls it, and I'm a bigger picture person. And obviously what I can see here is that we are moving resources that potentially are within schools. I mean, we haven't talked about the fact that there's going to be reductions on the back of changes to GWE, the removal of GWE. I know there's a business case for ALN, but it hasn't changed or increased in value, I don't think, in 3 years, and isn't proposed to increase in value, yet ALN is going through the roof, and that's part of where the struggles are coming within our schools. So the bigger picture here today is being scrutinised as holistically for the first time, in my view, and I genuinely believe that it would be right to propose, as a scrutiny member, that we ask our officers to look at providing a second option. I think leaving it to full council is just a non sequitur. It never works. How could you possibly have the ability to bring forward detail within that time? Obviously, this has been produced by the officers, the expert officers, and I think their expertise would be required to bring forward a slightly nuanced second option that actually provides fairness for schools. And I think we need to fight for our schools, not in a Trumpian way, fight, but we need to fight for our schools because actually are on their knees, and I think it's a fair and reasonable proposal, and I would just ask the scrutiny members present to consider supporting it or not.
Thank you very much, Councillor Anne. I think Matt, our monitoring officer, wants to come in. Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, to an extent, Chief Executive said what I was going to say about the budget setting process already, so I'm going to endorse that. The process that we've got constitutionally here is that Cabinet put forward proposed balanced budget.
Can't hear you, Matt.
The process we've got here is that Cabinet put forward a proposed balanced budget to Council, not a number of options. So I'd endorse what's already been said by the Chief Executive. It is, of course, though, in the course of considering that at full Council, open to members to put forward alternatives to the proposed balanced budget that's put before us, but it's not for Cabinet to propose to Council a number of options.
So is there somewhere within the Constitution, Matt, where it specifically says you can't put a proposal asking for a nuanced second option as a member of scrutiny?
There's certainly not something in the Constitution that specifically says that, Councillor Anne, word for word, but the requirement of Cabinet is to put forward a balanced budget, and the budget setting process, as you know, and as the Chief Executive just explained, has taken course over a number of months, and therefore what Cabinet have to do, and Cabinet's job tomorrow will be to recommend a balanced budget to Council, not a number of different options. So I suppose it's open to you, if you wish, Councillor Anne, to recommend that the recommended budget today should be adjusted in some way. But that would, I would suggest, have to be a recommendation on a different balance to the budget that you've got now, but not to put forward a number of different options to Council. So if you have a proposal as to how that 1% increase could be achieved, then you could put that forward and see if that had support for a recommendation to Cabinet for Cabinet to consider.
No, I mean, I think, Chair, I mean, I don't see why I can't propose that Cabinet and its officers, its experts actually look at a slight adjustment, slight nuance, which is in essence what my proposal is asking. I mean, I'd be happy to roll it up into that they look at that within their existing proposal, but I think it's two different things personally, and I think if I'm allowed within the Constitution to ask for this to happen, because I don't think it's hugely an extra amount of work. It is work. I do appreciate that. I think members deserve to have fair options, I think, at full council, and therefore, if there's no impediment constitutionally, I would just like the proposal to stand.
Thank you very much, Councillor Anne. We've now got next, we've got Councillor Mike online.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank
so-
you.
Sorry, Councillor Mike, sorry. Just going back there, we've had a proposal from Councillor Anne. Have we got a seconder for that, please, before we go to the next speaker? Is there a seconder for that proposal? No, sorry, Councillor Anne, that falls. We now go on next to Councillor Mike.
Councillor Abdo had his hand up. Is he not?
Sorry.
I saw Councillor
Was
Mike
that-
and Councillor Abdo, so I'm just not sure if we've explored the seconding or not.
No, I want to
Abdo,
speak, Chair.
Oh, you want to speak? Okay. Thank you, Councillor Abdo. Okay, Councillor Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies if I say something that's already been said. I've been kicked out a couple of times, so with my internet, so I apologise in advance. I just want to say a few words, if that's okay, and then I've got a couple of questions. First off, I want to say that I appreciate all of our services, and you only have to look at the motto above the door when you go in, which is Tegwch I bawb, fairness for all. So I appreciate everything that all our services are doing. I, like Gareth, welcome the protection that we've put in for schools, if you can call it protection, which it is. Councillor Julie mentioned that we were looking at 5% cut, 3% cut, 2% cut, and then we've got a standstill of no cut to schools. So I welcome that. And also, if you look at the consultation, out of 1,044 participants, 1,024 actually said that education was their top priority. I think it's fair to say that, you know, we're guided by UK and Welsh government. They have a massive influence on our finances, and especially the decisions that they take. Bearing in mind, I think we get about 71% of our overall budget from Welsh government. Amanda mentioned earlier about Welsh government having modelled their settlement to us, basing it on a 10.26 council tax rise to our residents. I think that's really sort of setting us up to fail when you come to that approach. And isn't it a real shame that we couldn't reverse this and say to the Welsh government, after we've consulted with our residents, and the pressures on our services, this is what we think would be realistic in a percentage rise or even a decrease. So model your funding to us on that. We've taken 92 million quid out of our budgets. Can you imagine if we sat here today and said, right, we've got 92 million pound, what can we spend it on? I think it'd just be amazing if we could have that. I just want to talk. One of my questions then is when we talk about our per capita and what we get. I've done rough calculations. I'll probably get pulled up for this, but they're on the back of a fag packet. I think we're up to, I don't smoke, so I think per capita we're about £304 behind Denbighshire. And if you time that times 117,000, Amanda, I think we get about 35 million. 152 behind Gwynedd, times that by 117,000 gets us about 17 million. And even if we just look at the Wales average, where we're behind, I think about £26 on the Wales average, it would give us 3 million more in the budget. So I will come to the first question, which is, well, first off, thank Charlie for what he's doing, the leader, in raising this issue and the relentless work he's been doing. And I think we've had a better settlement in that work that he's been doing along with Emily. So I thank them for that. And obviously the work that Cabinet are doing. Charlie, first question would be to you is, I think the per capita is totally wrong. Will you continue raising this issue, which I praise you for? And then the second question, Chair, and I do apologise for going on a little bit. Recent Bank of England announcement regarding interest rate cut of 0.25%, and the future predictions that probably further cuts could come along. Amanda, what does that mean in cash terms for Conway, please? So first to Charlie on that, and then to Amanda on the Bank of England interest rate cut. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Your figures per capita are right. Actually, when it's adjusted for our tax base, it does come down. Up from memory, it's about £260 per head, but still in the region of £30 million. And yeah, Gwynedd would be a bit below 15 million. So really, really significant figures. I have two issues with the formula. I don't think it basically recognised that the cost of looking after an aging population, first and foremost. We have age bands, and now we get £11 from 60 to 85, and it jumps to £1,900 when we know that 47% of people we look after are under the age of 85. So there's some fundamental issues there. There are lots of statistics around deprivation. To give a Conway an example relevant to Conway, there are additional payments for single pensioner households. That goes back 20 plus years to 2001. Memory in that between our last census and this one, the number of single resident households, pensioners, sorry, went from 6,000 to 9,000. So there's definite things in there which affect our formula. One that did change this year was around housing. The data they were using for housing was from 2013, 2014. We know pre-COVID we would have spent less than 400k in housing. That suddenly went to near 7 million. So getting that data up to date was really key. There is progress being made, but it's slow. It really is slow, and that's incredibly frustrating. So I continue to raise that at every opportunity, and quite frankly, I bore myself going on about it. But it is really important. But I do think there's a bigger question there. If we talk about AI all the time, I think there's a real opportunity to apply that to actually fund councils according to need, not just have this kind of lump sum when you go off you go. We know the impact on our budgets of the sort of really high cost care placements, can be really significant. So the Scottish model for me looks fairer. There's a much bigger floor there, which kind of helps iron out some of the population changes that we're seeing. So yeah, it's incredibly difficult, but my old physics teacher said a formula is only as good as the answer it gives. And when I look at the answer that it gives us relative to our neighbours, I don't think that formula is fit for purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Mike. Next, we've got Councillor Dilwyn online.
Sorry, Chair, it's just the interest rate cuts. Sorry, to Amanda.
Councillor Charlie, the interest rate cut. Amanda's going to do that now.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Mike. Yeah, it's slightly difficult. Sorry, I'm just trying to use my calculator at the same time again. Yeah, so essentially, we currently in the current year in Q3, I think we were forecasting that by the end of the year we will have spent about £10 million on our external borrowing costs. Now, we've essentially within our borrowing costs, we have about half of that money is in historic loans, which will run for quite a number of years. And in fact, actually, on some of those, because the loans were taken out really quite a long time back, we potentially still paying 9% on some of them because they were taken out 40 years ago for a 50-year length or whatever. But we have about half of the borrowing that we have is short-term or temporary loans. And if I were to take that element of it, looking at the forecast that I've got for next year, I'm estimating that we'll spend about 2.8 million on those temporary loans. So effectively, for every 0.25% reduction on that, we would be saving about £400,000. So every gain in interest rate reduction will help us. To an extent, we've built that into the forecast for next year because we've effectively done the forecast using our Treasury advisors' forecasts for interest rates. So to some extent, we have taken that into account. But if it were to fall more quickly than is expected at the moment, then obviously that would be to our benefit. But equally, if it were to be stretched out and not fall as quickly, would be the other way. The other complicating factor in it is it also depends on the timing of our cash flows. We're obviously making assumptions around when we would need to borrow based on the timing of our capital spend, for instance, and obviously, that's difficult to predict with absolute accuracy. But essentially, the long and short of all of that is that essentially a 0.25% reduction in interest rates will save us about 400,000.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Amanda, for that response. I think the Bank of England meet every 6 weeks, so if you're making decisions, you'd probably make it on the 7th week.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mike. So you're content now We move on to Councillor Dilwyn next online. You're on mute, Councillor Dilwyn. Can you not unmute there, Dilwyn? No, well, we'll go to the next speaker and then come back to you. If you haven't try that. Councillor Nigel, who's your question for?
Thanks, Chair. Well, I've got a question for Amanda, but first of all, I want to really thank Charlie, Amanda and the senior officers for their extensive work they've done to produce this balanced budget. It's a budget that I feel protects our residents. We've already heard that Welsh Government are suggesting that our council tax should be north of 10%. But this at 8.72%, I think protects those who are above low income. And also, because, you know, we've already heard that those who are on low income can claim a council tax discount up to 100%, depending on their personal circumstances. This budget also, I believe, and Amanda might correct me on this, but puts an additional, or the schools will get an additional 4.5 million this year. I find the disparity between our neighbouring authorities absolutely shocking. And I would like Amanda, with a mathematical head, to just briefly tell us what the our council tax would be set at should we have had a settlement as well as our neighbouring authorities. And for councillors Gareth, Anne and David,
yes, I think we know that she's very good, but that sounds a bit impossible right now. They're all laughing in the chambers. So,
okay,
Amanda, if you, if you...
But could I just also say that we've heard from Councillor Gareth that he would like to see us bolster our reserves. Councillor Anne wants us to give additional funding to schools, and Councillor David wants the hardship fund. Well, I would struggle, I would think, to support them if they wished to raise council tax above what it is at this particular time that we find ourselves in. But I also want to mention not just our senior officers,
you'll get a chance to speak in
but
tomorrow. This is scrutiny.
Our
so
junior
while
officers,
Amanda
Chair,
answers, if
who
you
were
could...
brought in savings this year by tightening their belts, and that's been most welcome. Thank you.
Amanda, did you have a quick calculation there on your fag packet?
I was just trying to work out how to do the calculation, actually, because it's not quite as straightforward as dividing it by 795. No, I don't have that calculation, but I tell you what I will ensure, Councillor Nigel, is that I've given it some consideration and could give you the figure to use at Cabinet tomorrow.
Thank you.
Perfect answer, Amanda. Thank you very much indeed. Right, we've now got, bearing in mind that we have members leaving for a fire authority meeting in a short time, which is also very important. We've got councillors Abdul and then Simon online. Then we're going to go to the recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to thank Amanda. She's been really hard at work, earning every penny. The question I asked, she has already answered. I think the answer is, apart from the one-off payment, there is no decision to have policies recommendation that we increase the reserves. So there will be no reserves from this budget. Right, second one, I won't be very popular, but I will ask, I will say, you know, as fairness for all was mentioned, and that's what I wanted to speak on, is yes, everybody, you know, I'm a governor of school, so I know how important the school's budget are. But for, you know, every service is important to everyone's. We talked about social service. We talked about our residents, elderly residents who worked entire life off and of saving so they can have a better life when they retire and get better service. You ask the ERF, you ask every other service, business communities. If you were to invite everyone, you would have had a passionate plea for every sector. How come we just had an invitation for the head to come and do the presentation and not others, and taking from 5% to 0%? I mean, when you're talking about a millions of budget, I'm sure you can save 1%, but it seems to be whoever who speaks loudest gets what they want and not the others. And where is our backbones? Why have we given in from 5% to 0%?
Charlie, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I don't agree, Abdul. It's very clear in this budget. If you look at the service pressures and social services, they're recognised. I think there's heading towards about £14 million because that's essential spend to protect our eldest and to protect our youngest. Our schools are in an interesting position. They're all run by the governing bodies. Some are in more acute situations than others. So there's a judgment call to be made. We know the effect of a falling roll is impacting the schools. I've already said about how difficult that is to realise those savings. I think we all need to work together collectively at greater pace, really, to try and find solutions to those problems, but that they are difficult. They are difficult because schools and local schools mean so much to everybody. But for those that feel schools could have taken a cut, that they're entitled to their opinion. I think for me, it's getting to a consensus that most members agree with, and elements of this budget, as I say, won't please everybody, but that is the nature of a balanced budget, isn't it? You get the position that the majority of members feel they can support. So thank you.
You content, Councillor Abdul, with that reply?
I'm not, Chair. I'm going to abstain from that voting today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Abdul, for that. Last speaker is Councillor Simon online, then we're going to the recommendations. Councillor Simon.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. Yeah, I just want to thank Charlie and the Cabinet and Amanda for coming up with this budget that doesn't cut schools. I really do not want to go back to my school as a governor and say we have to make people compulsorily redundant. I really will not vote for a budget that does that. So I'm very grateful that you've come up with a budget that does that, and congratulate Amanda with she made a very, very good impression on my governors, and I hope her calculator hasn't caught fire during the meeting. Thank you very much.
A bit at the moment, by the looks of it, yeah. Thank you, Councillor Simon. Councillor Dilwyn, have you sorted your techie problems out now?
Yes, I did not have problems. Thank you, Chair, for offering, but I wasn't aware that I had asked to speak, actually.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
That stray little hand catches us all out. So, okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. It's been a really good debate, hasn't it? Very serious topics of a very trying situation. So we're now going to go, we had a recommendation from Councillor Anne about an alternative budget for schools. That recommendation fell. So I'm now waiting for a recommendation from the floor. Councillor Aaron, what's your recommendation?
I propose that we ask Cabinet to continue the discussions tomorrow, and that we propose the recommendations and thank the officers for their work setting this budget.
Dear Councillor Aaron, have we a second of that? Councillor Hannah. Have we any other proposals, recommendations? No. Okay, we'll now move to the vote on Councillor Aaron's proposals. If everyone could show their hands clearly, either for or against, we'll start with 4. 5 in chamber, 4 online. Okay. Those against? 2 in chamber, 1 online. That's 3 voted against the budget. So that is carried. So thank you very much. Any abstentions? Councillor Abdul. It's been a long morning. Thank you. 1 abstention. Thank you very much. So that is carried. So thank you very much, members, and look forward to round 2 at full council.
Diolch, Chair.